This one's like your lunchbox. It's a sub 10 liter volume SF case, but its tower cooler capability punches well beyond its size. Welcome to Machines More. So I hope you're all well. I've been under the weather, was struggling a little bit, but just getting back at it here. So hopefully the voice still comes through okay. So this was a fun one. We're going to talk about this build in the Mechanic Master C24. Real quick, big thanks to Mechanic Master for sending this by for the build, but this video is not sponsored. And as always, I hope you enjoy the objective content on this channel. If you are new here, do consider subscribing. Appreciate it. So the C24 is part of Mechanic Master's Cube series. This case has been around for quite some time, but this is my first time trying one of these out. On the product box in Chinese, this cute little guy is referred to as Little Sugar Cube or Little Sugar. Now this big cube of sugar fits mini-itx or mini-itx boards. It's spec'd for SFX power supplies only, and as you might imagine with the 249 by 249 side profile dimensions, the GPU length compatibility is a big restriction here, and that comes in at 245 millimeters max. It does, however, have a width of 160 millimeters, and Mechanic Master has spec'd this to accept up to a 135 millimeter tower cooler, which means that you can use a compact 120 millimeter tower cooler like Thermalright's PA120 Mini, which is an excellent option. Otherwise, you can also use up to a 120 millimeter AIO, but the placement of that is challenging if you go with this default glass panel. It really makes more sense if you have the vented side panel, which from what I can tell, based on the manual, is an option for this case. These dimensions place the case squarely at 9.9 liters, so technically it is sub 10 liters. That means that, like the T1 reference edition, when you pair that with a Noctua C14S, this C24 paired with a PA120 Mini is a uniquely potent air cooling combo within the sub 10 liter space. This case features a steel inner with aluminum outer panels, and you need to take off these outer panels in order to access the mounting locations for fans and the power supply cage and other things. The front panel is ventilated, and typically you would use the vents here for the power supply fan. The top and the bottom panels can each take two 80 millimeter fans or a single 120 like I've mounted up at the top here. And the rear of the case can house a 92 millimeter fan at the back if you'd like. It does have 3 slots of space for the GPU. You can have up to 135 millimeters of card width, but you do have to make sure you account for any power cable protrusions, as is common with a lot of cards. So for my test build today, I really wanted to see what was possible for air cooling in this sub 10 liter case. So this is a 9900X build. To pair with it, I have the ASUS B850i, which is an excellent mini-itx board for any mid to high-end build. Kingston DDR5. The power supply is Thermalright's Tough Power 850 SFX. As mentioned, the PA120 Mini is going to be the most capable option within 135 millimeters of height. And over this one, I kind of experimented with the fan choice, and I did see that a 120 by 25 millimeter fan does fit there. But it kept hitting the RAM latches, and it was just too tight to be able to do the fan clips. So I went with a slim 120. This is the Noctua NFA 12 by 15 here. So GPU, it's going to be the most constraining option for most builders nowadays. While the max length is 245 millimeters, I think most users will have some trouble getting that long of a card into the space here because of the way the inner frame sticks out a little bit, on this case a lot bit here. And this ASUS 4060 Ti dual SSD version is about 227 millimeters long. Even then, I did have to remove the CPU cooler. Then I loosened the panel screws to kind of stretch the case out and then, slide it in. So it was not easy. I should have gotten the card in a little bit earlier. If you are closer to the 245 millimeter mark, then I'd say you may want to mount the card before doing the final install on the power supply and the CPU cooler, and that way you have a lot more space to maneuver this into place. The cable management may be tricky though if you do power supply last. I did find that the cable settled into this space just fine between the board and the PSU, so That is one way to do it. The one thing you really do want to keep is this underside of the PSU tidy, because that will otherwise, all the cables here will really interfere with the GPU. So while there is space for an SFX-L, I think that extra length will make it very difficult to manage a card right here in such tight spacing. So yeah, realistically, with GPUs the way they are nowadays, for most board partner cards, you're going to be stuck with 60 or 60 Ti level of card. 4070 or 5070 Founders Edition cards do meet the dimensional requirements, but as mentioned, you do have to be very intentional with the order that you build this up in if you use that long of a card, because those are spot on at 245, if not just a little bit less. One thing to note, so even though the top and the bottom of the case, they take a single 120mm fan on each end, it's actually partially blocked off. You have the solid section here, so you may also experience some irregular noise from the fans being constricted. I did get a little bit of that muffled sound. Based on my experience building this up, especially with a tall tower cooler, you do want to leave it towards the end, although you do want to plug the cooler fan in first, since access there is going to be nearly impossible if this cooler is in place. As for the fan orientation, I went with a rear intake paired with a top exhaust. I did note that I could have installed a 92mm fan at the back, but when you have asymmetrical combinations along with a solid side panel, it's debatable whether that setup is worth it, since a 92mm fan would have to run at significantly higher RPMs so as to not restrict a 120mm fan, which we've got here, and the noise is just a lot higher with a 92mm fan, as opposed to just letting this fan run unimpeded adjacent to this open panel. So I think this actually works acceptably well enough, as you'll see. And the other thing that helps is the top exhaust helps direct makeup air through this end and up the top. Litmus test is, of course, can the 9900X run acceptably well in here? Basically, I'd say yes, it can. It's not great, but it's acceptable. With Blender, which was set up for a CPU-only render, the CPU hit the max 95-degree temp, which resulted in power being limited slightly by the CPU. 159 watts was where we ended up, which is not terrible considering you're usually in that neighborhood of 162 watts when not cooling limited, so you're not losing too much. Now, the boost clocks didn't seem to be impacted much though, since this actually is typically where we would find your average clocks landing anyway. But to get it to work better, I set a curve optimizer setting of -15, which should be doable for most chips. Now, this is the typical your mileage may vary type of arena, but in my experience, it's a fairly average bar to clear. And along with that setting, I dialed in a PPT limit of 155 watts. What this setting does is ask for a higher boost clock at each given power level, but since I didn't want it to go back up to 159 watts and then run at the max temp, the 155 watt setting gives us a little headroom here. So with this build, I can actually run the 9900X at a frequency that's higher than you would normally see at stock settings, 10 megahertz or so, and the temps stayed shy of the max level, which I think that kind of performance can be more than acceptable for some folks. Now, of course, unless you are going for a workstation build, for those of you seriously contemplating a gaming build with this case, for sure a better, more suitable CPU would be a 9700X or 9800X 3D, since those will run at a much lower power level, and the PA120 Mini will be very effective at cooling either of those. But this was just an exercise to see just what we could accomplish with this case, and I think it's actually quite impressive. For gaming with a GPU like this, though, the GPU is obviously going to be your limiting factor. You're going to get what the GPU is capable of. And this is Cyberpunk 2077 at high, straight raster, no RT or any funny business. It's okay. It's definitely playable, but once you enable RT, you might have to start dialing things in like DLSS, but temps are not bad. Not great though, considering the card only draws down about 160 watts, and it is a smaller cooler here. But this is well within the typical operating range. And also with the CPU cooler in such close proximity in a small, densely packed cube and a glass panel, you really don't want to go too crazy anyway. As mentioned, the size allowance for the GPU, and more specifically this amount of space you have for the GPU's cooler, that's what's going to limit you here. So seems like 160 watts, 175 watts, that's kind of the most that you can clear with this case. The CPU temps for gaming are also okay, but not great considering the low utilization on the CPU. This it's definitely going to see some impact from the GPU's operation. But realistically, other than the slightly higher fan speeds that are necessitated at these temps are absolutely fine for the components and for their proper operation. So there's this handle that they include with this case, which I think a lot of users will enjoy using. That makes this absolutely great option for moving around, just repositioning it here and there. Maybe if you do some LAN events, that's even more handy, or things of that nature. Travel with this handle or not with the handle, it doesn't really matter. It can fit in the suitcase very easily. These dimensions of this, the cube shaped side profile means that it's pretty efficient in terms of the volume for the amount of footprint that it takes up in a suitcase. If you do want to run something like a 9900X in here, just like I built it up, and use it as a traveling CPU-based workstation, then this case would also be great for that, along with a very capable air cooler. A build like where the GPU isn't as critical, but you can still play plenty of games, right? So overall, I was quite impressed with this case. Finish quality is very good, and the kind of different take on sub 10 liters is nice. They have a few more colors, but I think this Bumblebee yellow one is pretty unique in a way that not too many case companies do straight up Bumblebee, and I think this is actually quite a faithful rendition of that color. So if you enjoyed this build, please give a like. I have the full build list down below. Please make sure to check that out. Any questions, let me know down below. Also, please make sure you are subscribed. And as always, big thanks for watching.